Please take your seats. Hadjin Secretary Kravel organized this museum, the lectures.
It's not making much difference. Doing what? On the zoom there, it's zooming.
Our next speaker is Mr. Paul Hoover, who is going to talk about the life and story of Judge Baptist Bird, the first superintendent of Hadjin Order. Mr. Hoover. Կխնդրեի, որ թերատորները արնեի պիտի ստվիկ դասախոսությունը։ All right.
Working? All right.
Can we be seated, please? Ladies and gentlemen, can we be seated, please?
Պիտի խնդրեի, որ թերատորները արեք խոսողը արդեն պեմ պարսացած է։ Շնորհակալ պիտի լայ եթե ավելի արագ շարժեի։
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here today. It's humbling, and it's my second trip to this part of California to associate and have fellowship with the Armenian community and with Maggie and the people at the museum. Prior to a couple of years ago, all I knew about Armenians were that their last name ended in IAN. At least that was my stereotype, because my mother had on the wall some paintings on the back of glass, of which one of them is out in the foyer as part of the collection of things that we were privileged to donate to the museum. Every time I go back after having been here, I think to myself, I want to be an Armenian when I grow up. It's a place for me to be at home. So I'm here to share just a little bit about some of the things I was able to gather from the impact of the orphanage on life in Armenia, on one family, on the Joshua and Elizabeth Fiddler family. Could we go back to the picture of the family first? What we had up there on the screen, and just leave that up there for a while. So I'll pick it up kind of where they were impacted first. Just like Kevin has said, that the Gerbers and Maria Gerber and Rose Lambert were impacted by an Armenian Christian who came to the hospital and encouraged them to consider Turkey. In 1899, my grandfather met a minister who had been, from Armenia and came and talked to them at a conference where he was in eastern Pennsylvania about the needs among the orphans. And my grandfather fell in love, I think, had a passion for that need. And so he submitted himself to a call of God to go to the orphanage and applied to the United Orphanage given us such a great history of. He was accepted. And I'm going to point out that there were other applicants. So Grandpa was well received. In fact, Mr. Sprunger, J.A. Sprunger, who was on the right of one of those pictures that we saw with the beard, was a very strong supporter and said he was one of the most qualified, or the most qualified, teacher and worker to go over there and lead the orphanage. So in 1899, the family, because he had been a successful minister in eastern Pennsylvania, in rural churches, little churches that met in halls, in buildings if they had one, in homes, sometimes maybe in sheds or barns, 5 or 6 different towns where he would make a circuit by foot and by bicycle, very rarely by horse because he never owned a horse. He would have this circuit ministry of Christianity, evangelical Christianity under the Mennonite Brethren in Christ Church. And in the course of that activity, he was serving largely a German-Swiss population, because they were immigrants from Europe in the 1600s and 1700s who came and established farms mostly in the United States. And so Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Kansas, those were all largely farming areas, and many German, Swiss, Mennonite Brethren in Christ people attended those churches. And he preached in both High and Low German, and my mother, all the children knew and spoke German, although they also spoke English, and he spoke English. But he too then met this minister and went overseas and decided to go and become the first superintendent of the orphanage. When they were first accepted, the whole family was accepted as part of the missionary package. It was in October, his diaries noted that they had a small auction and sold all the possessions they had. And he spent the next months touring those rural churches in Michigan and Kansas and Ohio and Indiana, and raising funds while the family stayed with other relatives of my grandmother in Norristown, Pennsylvania. And during the course of those months of the fall to winter of 1899, the board made a decision that the family in its totality could not go. The 10-year-old Naoma on the left, Anna on the right, John in front, who was 5 years old, and my mother in the back between the two parents. The family was to be split. The 2 older girls went to hundreds of miles north into Canada to stay with a church family up there that had 10 children. Now they had 12. John went with a farming family in Pennsylvania, in Dillinger, Pennsylvania, that family that had been one of his parishioners during his church life. And it wasn't an easy decision. In fact, it took agonizing prayer for them to finally accept the decision. Now, Grandma penned a note about Grandpa's struggle, and I shall read it. He said it was in the greatest agony that ever beat upon his heart, and almost giving up in despair, as he laid on the floor with his head resting on the Bible. So that was the struggle that he already went through before they made the final step to go overseas. The 3 fiddlers arrived in Messina in 1900, and from Messina they traveled 2 days across the hot plains of Sis, where 52 orphan boys greeted them with flowers, with branches of palm 12 feet long and a banner that was inscribed with joy, joy, joy. Very happy to greet them. But here they waited for their luggage, and while they were waiting for their luggage, Grandpa penned an anecdote about their trip from Racina. We had 2 small horses hitched to a wagon. The horses here are not used to pulling heavy loads, and they balk very easily. One day, just as we were in the midst of a stream, our horses balked and the front wheels sank into the sand up to the axle. The driver yelled at the horses and lashed them, but it was to no avail. The driver and a Turkish soldier who accompanied us on the trip unhitched the horses, and I was compelled to take off my coat, my vest, my shoes, my stockings, and roll up my pants and wade in. Well, actually, he said trousers. I carried out our things. I took my wife on my back, and I carried her out, and then worked the vehicle out of the stream. But I almost stuck fast in the sand doing it. He never noted what happened to my mother, so whether she swam up, whether she stayed in the wagon, or he carried her out and just didn't comment, I don't know, but it left me with a little curiosity. At the orphanage, they joined the small team of nurses and Christian workers that Kevin has given us such a great understanding of. And he took with him some skills beyond being a minister, a Bible teacher, and so on, because he was a cabinet maker. I still have a piece of furniture that he made, and he was a carpenter. He was even a shoemaker. I still have a little hammer from his where he would put the shoes together and repair them. And so he had some trades that he could use in the orphanage as well. And Grandma could help with being a seamstress and so on as needed. But they, and besides teaching the children and the local widows about the Lord Jesus Christ. During these days, my 3-year-old mother befriended the local children, played with them, and started to learn the Arabic language. And then in 1901, in April of 1901, another little girl was born, and Rose was born. So my aunt, my mother's sister, was born in Hadjin. The fiddlers found the work rewarding and enjoyed serving the Lord, but they were in constant fear for their personal safety, as killings and local skirmishes periodically threatened them. The country was in political turmoil still, and his diary mentioned people being jailed, the police being unable to control the situations, and Armenians being killed or just disappearing and never returning. Again, added to these fears for their safety, they were in fear for their health, because, as Kevin has mentioned, diseases and illnesses were rampant that continually threatened their health. Widows and orphans often came to the orphanage with sicknesses associated with their past lifestyle of poverty and homelessness. Over the years, God kept the fiddlers healthy for the most part, but at one point, as Kevin has said, in February of 1903, both the parents came down with smallpox, and that was a fairly serious, sometimes fatal disease, even in 1900. And when another mission worker died, Grandpa wrote in his diary, "I always thought I would die there." In addition, at one point, the orphanage accepted a boy from the streets. No one knew what he was bringing or if he had any serious health condition. And my grandfather didn't send him for medical care. He was transferred to another facility where, unfortunately, poor Garabed died. My grandpa wasn't a very emotional man, being German through and through. He didn't express a lot of emotions, but he did write that day, poor Garabed died. The 2 nurses who had arrived in Hadjin, as Kevin says, 2 years before, were critical of his decision, and controversy arose within the mission staff. as well as between Joshua and the mission board back in the United States. Ultimately, some people blamed Grandpa for Garabed's death. Added to the safety and health risks, they were receiving letters from their two daughters, which tugged at their heartstrings and regularly reminded them of the family back in America whom they loved very dearly. The eldest was now becoming a teenager, and of course what do teenagers do? They rebel. And it wasn't, there were letters from the mother of the home about some of her rebelliousness and her activities and coming back to the Lord and then being wayward again. And so although it's totally unclear to us in the family lore or from church history as near as we can make out exactly what the issues and stressors were, in 1903, they petitioned the mission board to ask them to be returned to the United States to pastor the churches in Pennsylvania again. Rather than grant their permission, the board gave them an ultimatum. Either stay for your full number of years or move immediately to Brazil. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. After the board's wishes were settling in, they unilaterally and quietly boarded a ship and left for Pennsylvania. While crossing the ocean, the mission board acted quickly and passed a resolution which in effect excommunicated them from the church. They even went so far as to notify previous church parishioners that they should have nothing to do with them or they would welcome them into their home. Joshua appeared before the board and asked to be reinstated, but his appeal was denied. He then applied to and was accepted to the Ontario Conference of the same denomination, because there are a lot of agrarian, rural Swiss German settlers up there. And he was accepted up there and pastored Canadian churches over the next 7 years. Their health suffered throughout these years, and he left the ministry in 1910. But for the Fiddler family, some emotional healing occurred when the Canadian conference leaders sent word back to Pennsylvania saying, if you have any more like Fiddlers, send them on up. I remember hearing those words repeated at home. So my mother, Bertha, who had lived among the Armenian children for those 3 years, gained a love for Armenians. She returned in 1925, again under the auspices of the same church. She was originally, when she left, to have been assigned to Damascus, but there is still physical political turmoil and strife going on there. So she stayed for 5 years almost in Beirut and worked with Dorinda Bowman. Toward the end, she contracted malaria. And she was working with the refugees from the genocide, the 1915 genocide, because the refugee camps were still going that many years later, 15 years later, 10 and 15 years. So she was working, and Kevin showed a picture of that in his slides. So she contracted malaria toward the end, and her health was so poor that it took 2 months of R&R in good Canadian air for her to recover. Although she fully recovered, fully expected to return to Beirut, the health of her parents was declining, my grandparents, Joshua and Elizabeth, and she never returned. And then she married and gave birth to 3 sons, of which I am the youngest. But her love for Armenians never died. for many years, she toured southern Ontario churches and spoke of the needs of the Armenians and raised funds overseas. Many of the things that she would set out on the tables, although some of them have been lost, are out there in the foyer, and what we were able to contribute to the little display here. One thing I remember, and those of you who are Armenians, this may have more meaning to you but it was a curiosity to me and to other children in the audiences where she was speaking and raising funds and awareness of the plights of the Armenians. She would dress my father up like an Arab. And he was dark complexion and had jet black hair. She put everything on him in the long garb. And the stunt that he pulled was entertaining, at least to Canadian children. She had like a teapot with a very narrow spout on it, and it looked like it was made of reeds. I don't know what it was made of, but it held water. And he would hold it up. She would use this as a demonstration of how Armenians drank. He held it up and he'd open his mouth, and my dad didn't need a swallow. He loved water. He never passed a fountain he never stopped for, or a spring that he never stopped to get a drink. And he'd pour the water out and it would just go straight down his throat. He could open his throat right up. Well, it was entertaining, and she said that's how Armenian men could drink. Is that true or isn't it? Is it? Okay. So it makes some sense. So now if you'll show the rest of the couple of slides that just so I can comment on it. That's my grandmother over there on the side. That was a picture that we had, and Kevin showed that one, I believe, of the, there's my mother beside one of the caregivers. So she was there from the age 3 to age 6.5, 7, and she spoke German, high and low German, Arabic, and English. I barely can speak English. The next one, and that's another picture of the orphans. She really, they got to her heart as a child. Go ahead. And then there she is in the later years, and that's a close-up of the refugee camp and the work that she was doing during the moment over there in Beirut in 1925 to 1930. And there she is again in the center of the back. Thank you. I was truly blessed when Kevin Blowers introduced me to Maggie, and I was able to come out and visit with her and meet some of the Armenian people and the delightful food that is native to your area. And I fell in love with the mission and the purpose of the museum. And so it's a pleasure for us and an honor to have donated these few items in their memory to the museum. And we certainly know that you folks are going to take care of them and honor them, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Hadjin, who is an expert in rug repairs, and he comes from a family of rug makers and repairers. So he's going to talk about modern memories and patches of hope.
Good morning, welcome. First of all, I would like to thank Maggie Goshen, Ararat Eskityan Museum, Armenian Studies Program at Cilicia, Dr. Shamasyan, also the National Association of Armenian Studies and Research, NAS, for organizing this event and give us a chance to revisit the legendary city of Hadjin. Now, you all have heard written or studied testaments of what Hadjin was. The life of Hadjin, the missionaries, the works they've done. All these are records that are written, or some of them are even transferred to us orally. But among all those, there are also objects that bring memories and tell us stories about the past, about people and events. Among those, we're going to be talking about two items, about two relics that, thanks to Mennonite College, thanks to Kevin, and thanks to Mr. Hoover, who came forward and donated those objects to Eskityan Museum, where we had the chance to study them and to bring it to the public. The first one is the orphan dress. Now, I've been working with Maggie for quite some time, and whenever she receives a textile, she calls me. If it needs an attention, I take care of it, I wash it, I repair it, I clean it, I mount it, and I'll present it in the Eskityan Museum. While doing so, that gives me a chance to study, to have a close contact with those items. And believe me, it is an experience. When you work with your hands and spend time on these items, on those historical items, you feel all kinds of emotions that are very difficult to explain. And that gives you thoughts, profound thoughts about who made those, how it was made. And you ask all kinds of questions to yourself as to why this item was made in such a way. Well, in this case, the orphan dress, when we were talking about it and studying it, we didn't know, we didn't have any document stating who was the child who was wearing this dress that was survived from the Armenian massacres and made her or his way all the way to the Hadjin orphanage. From the memories of Dorinda Bowman, we know that they found her one morning in front of the Hadjin orphanage. She carefully took the dress, she folded, she hid it, and they took care of the child. But again, we don't know. And when I was working and dressing this relic, I was thinking, why so many patches on this? Why would a child in such a destitute situation find a small piece of cloth and take her time to sew it neatly on this dress? We understand that there were places that needed mending. For example, if you look at the front of the dress, you see so many patches, 10, 12 patches, Some of them are patches over other patches to mend it. But the back side of the dress, you see hardly any patch. There are torn areas, but it's not covered. So, what's the reason to have all these? Not because she couldn't see the back. She can. She can twist it, she can sew it anywhere. But she didn't. She only did it in the front. Now, here is a picture we found in a newspaper published in 1899 in New York newspaper. It's the Daily Tribune, where there was an article talks about Dr. Lepsius opening a carpet factory in Armenia. And in that article, we see the picture of those children, orphan children that were wearing similar dresses, but nothing like this one. Now, every time I visit, Cilicia Museum, I visit quite often, and I cannot go on to do my business before I stop by this dress. And Maggie wanted to baptize this child with the name of Anahid. So every time I visit Cilicia, I have to stop by and say hello to Anahid and ask her how she's doing, if everything is okay. And every visit brings these thoughts, thinking about it, what made those patches. Finally, I decided to ask Maggie that if I could examine the dress from inside out, the inside, every single patch. Thank you, Maggie, for giving me the opportunity to do so. My examination revealed that the dress had many torn areas. The areas that needed mending, she found the cloth and sewed it on the back of the torn area, not on the front, from the back, and she neatly started sewing all around the torn edges. Now we can see this, that it is much needed so she can have the dress last longer. This is the front and that's the back. You can see the same sewing. Now imagine if a child left alone without any parents and she is out all alone, what would make her to think that she's gonna last, she's gonna survive? In her mind, she is preparing herself, she is mending her dress, she is taking care of herself, thinking she's going to stay alive. That's very important. With every stitch, she is mending her dress. She's thinking she's going to make it. Resiliency, very strong state of mind, she must add. To go through this, we see other pictures where we see children, even grown-ups, with totally torn clothing, dirty clothing that hasn't been taken care of. But not this one, not Anahid. Anahid had the feel she's gonna make it, and she did. Now here are about 10, 12 different patches just to mend her dress. Again, from the front, the dress is torn, it needs mending. The patch is placed from the back and sewn so it can give some body. Now, here is another sample, and the back. The front and the back. Any cloth, that is fine. But while doing so, I have came across a the upper part of the dress, we are looking on this one sideways. I have found that the upper part, the shoulder part of the original dress, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not worn, it's not torn, it didn't need any mending. But I found a much older, hand-woven fabric, sewn that is much older and much more torn, sewn on a perfect part of the dress. So what would be the reason for her to find this piece of cloth and sew it on her shoulder where it doesn't need any mending? Now, you're looking at the back side of the picture. Let's flip it. This is the back side. You see the cloth is perfect. It's not torn. It doesn't need any mending. Yet from the front, let's flip it again. You see right there, this piece, it's completely torn. It's much older. I have enlarged this picture, enlarged and examined that this fabric, even the thread to weave the cloth, the thread is hand-spun cotton, not machine spun. So it's a hand-spun cotton, hand-woven cloth that was made into a dress, and from that dress she took a small part, neatly folded it, and sewed it on top of her. Now, what could that be? How many in our audience, how many of you like to keep, let's say, your child's first shoe? Most of you do that. Most of you go to visit a place and you like to have a piece of souvenir. You bring home all kinds of souvenir. Most of people, when their loved ones are away, they miss them, they try to wear their shirts, they try to have something from their loved ones to feel close to. So would it be unreasonable to think that this child, left all alone, orphan, the only thing she could carry with her from her family, is it possible to have a piece of cloth of her loved ones sewn on her? Makes you think, why is it that an old, very old piece of fabric sewn on a perfectly unneeded part of her dress, she could not carry anything with her except those few memories? Here is another piece. It's neatly folded and sewn on the front, but nothing in the back. It needs absolutely nothing. So these pieces that were sewn on the upper part of the dress, it's fair to assume that she has placed those for a specific purpose. In her mind, she's going to make it. She did roam all over the place until she found herself in front of the orphanage, and that was her salvation. During that moment, must have realized this. She didn't bring much with her to America when she was ordered to return home. She had this dress and a small carpet that was woven by the orphans, especially for her. Some more pictures of the patches. Here is a close-up. This one, again, from the back, there isn't any hole, there isn't any torn area. 1, 2, 3, all these 3 pieces right in front of her, right close, some pieces close to her heart. Here it is. So, we have a relic here that silently, quietly tells us a whole story. And sometimes we visit museums, we see those relics, those pieces. How important are they? Well, to me, those objects are as important as many books, many written and orally told stories. Those relics also are testaments of the past. Now here is the orphan rug that was woven especially for Dorinda woman. Now, as Kevin told us, that the time didn't permit for the girls to finish the rug, and they cut it short so she can roll it and bring it with her. As you see the surrounding border down in this corner, it's perfectly, there is a continuity in the design pattern. But when we come up here, it's broken. Even the central motifs are not complete. So it's obvious. When the time came, she realized there's no time to finish the carpet. She told them just put the finish with the border, and she took it with her. But studying at this rug and comparing with other carpets that orphans wove, and just in general, we see one difference, one major difference between this and, let's say, comparing to the fiddler rug. In the fiddler rug, both of them are outside, by the way. You can look and see the patterns, the borders, the field iconography is perfectly designed and aligned, symmetrically correct, proportionately correct. There is nothing improvised, let's say. But if we look at the other rod, we see in the center that there are random elements placed, random symbols, random patterns placed randomly all over the rod. There are facing major 3 or 4 elements that have a mirror image on the other side, symmetrically arranged. But in between, we have all those tiny, tiny symbols. As if Dorothy Bowman, what happened? We lost the picture, what can I do? Okay, while you put it back on the screen, I have to do it from here. We lost the file. As if she gave me a liberty to those children, and she said, look, each one of you, whatever you like to weave, you're free to put on this rug. Can we have the file back? I don't see it. And those children, from their memories, from their tradition, whatever they knew, any symbolic item that meant something to them, they wove it in this open field. Thank you. They wove it in this open field as if they were making a collage, just like a in the end of the school term, children are departing from the school. They're not going to see their teacher anymore. Each one has to write something to present it to their children. So these girls, each one wore I cannot enlarge it here. Let me see. Each one of those small elements, we see a cross, we see a wheel of eternity, we see amulets, we see signs of blessing. Thank you. Thank you. Every single element here, it has a meaning. It's a blessing. It's a well wish. It's anything that they have, those children wished for their teacher, for Mr. Bowman. So this rug was never meant to be sold, to be in public. It does not have any specific decorative object except something left from those children to their teacher, to their guardian. So these two pieces, again, when those orphans were weaving this rug, with every knot they were tying on this carpet, they had a hope, similar to the dress that they were sewing those patches. It's the same thing, either sewing a patch, writing a well-wish note, or weaving small symbolic elements. They are records, and they came to us through those objects. We know something little more about those orphan children. And again, thank you to Mr. Fiedler and Kevin for giving us the opportunity to study this object closely.
Again, time for questions. Mr. Hoover, would you like to come, please? Before the questions, though, I would like to make two announcements. One, all those who participated or are participating in this conference, please come forward after this session so that we can take a group picture. Dr. Hovanesyan, including yourself, and Maggie too, Hasmi, and all those, the rest of us. And also, I would like to make the following announcement. On April 2nd, the Armenian Studies program at Cal State Norwich is going to have its annual banquet. The flyers with the details are on the table in the foyer. Please pick one, come and support us. Thank you. Now questions. Yes.
I've never been accused of not being heard, but I'll use it anyway. Mr. Fiedler, you mentioned that when they got to CIS, if I heard it correctly, they undertook to learn Arabic. I was surprised by that, and you said I think your mom also spoke Arabic. No Armenian, no Turkish. Was the demographics such in the area that it called for Arabic? That was curious.
Well, what you're probably experiencing is my ignorance. I'm not sure. I had heard her refer to it as Armenian and Arabic, and I now know it was different, but it was the local language that was spoken that they studied and that she picked up. So please give me a leniency there. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yes.
I was wondering where a young orphan child, assuming that she was not at the orphanage, would get a needle and thread. It's just...
We do have other samples that those children at home, at very early age, we have samples of embroideries. Needlecraft was well practiced at home. I won't be surprised if she carried those as a necessity. If she found it, if she carried it with her, I won't be surprised. We don't have to do an in-depth exhibit here, but I have noticed that each button also on her dress is completely off. I mean, the whole dress is all made up. The threads were even there are some threads that were unraveled from a cloth. It's not a string, just a hand-spun piece of string unraveled. So a needle is no big deal. Some of the cloths also are not neatly cut. That's why she just ripped it, then folded and sewed it neatly. It's very crudely done.
I have a question. So I know that you know that rug is from Armenia and it's an original. Is there anything for people that, like, if I was shopping for an Armenian-made rug, anything that you could point to in that rug that lets you know a character, a symbol, or a fabric, or a color pattern that makes it Armenian?
Well, just a general difference. Persian or other nomadic carpets are highly decorated, and when you look at them, you can see flowers, leaves, very obvious. Even sometimes you can tell what kind of flowers they are. Armenian rugs, although do contain flora and fauna, but the vast majority of them are geometric symbols. They provoke thoughts. They're abstract. You look at them, just a pattern. They don't give a direct indication what they are. That's a completely different subject when we can talk about. It's another language there. It's an iconography. It's symbolism that comes to us from prehistoric times. We can see similarities in patterns from petroglyphs, 14,000-year-old petroglyphs on Khachkars, in many other places. But the very basic thing to look for is those geometric, abstract designs that have other meanings than just decorative. So those are actually founded in Armenian rugs. One thing I forgot to mention, it's important to note that these two Hadjin rugs, if you notice, they are not epi rugs. They don't have any colors, unlike other Armenian or any general Armenian rugs. Every single color you see here is a natural color of the land. There is no dyed yarn on these rugs because of the lack of that luxury. So what those children did, when they got the wool, they received the wool had various shades, grays, blacks, light brown, dark browns. They separated these, they spun them individually, and they wove the carpet separating these colors so they can make the pattern so vivid. It's not that it was done on purpose, this color, it was lack of the luxury to dye those colors.
Yes.
I've seen on Hushamadian has shared some pages from one of the orphanages where they were writing who had come into the orphanage, and it's in English. And they weren't all orphans. They were sometimes families. My understanding is that if the father had died or abandoned the family and there wasn't enough money, if they were starving, they were sometimes, if there was room in the orphanage, they were written into the orphanage book. And so not, this particular girl may have been an orphan and all on her own, but my understanding is that not all of the people in the orphanage were strictly orphans.
We did a segment, we did a presentation on, with the title of Survival Through Needle Art. We had, after the aftermath of genocide, in refugee camps, when most men were massacred, Armenian women, this is very much discussed in an upcoming new movie called Women of 1915. In fact, the diasporan Armenian communities were founded by needle and thread. All those women in refugee camps, they didn't have husbands. They had to provide life for their children, for their family in a dignified manner. They did what they knew best. They reached to needle and thread. They started making embroideries, needleworks, rugs, you name it. And in some places, some of those embroideries were sold by weight to Europeans. We have ample archives about that, photos, even samples. I mean, we can see down in this museum several samples of Marash needlework, Urfa needlework. This is very, very well documented.
Yes.
I would like to reflect on Raja's presentation as you were describing the meticulous way of sewing. It reminded me a very simple poem, which eventually got immortalized by Ganachian, which went this way in Armenian. Ձիձեռնալը հույնգիշներ և գիշիներ և երկեր, ամեն մեկ շուր որ գուպսներ իր հինդուրը գիշեր. I thought it was a beautiful poetry on the drum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, Professor.
Thank you very much. I just want to
Դուրս դեստեմել է։
Ասի երիտասարդ Թամանյանին իմ նկար մը գա։ Թամանյանը գոմեն
Live stream գնանք կորմենք։
Վարտով երեր
Միան մեկ բան, thank you։
Ասկանադեն չերի մերադենը գնաց կոր։
Գներեք, արդեն գնեի որ, բայց շատ գներեք։ Հայրավոր մարդ գտի որ հիմա բոլորիս, so։
Իրավ։
Այո։
Օփան գնաց կոր, դայրեք։
Այո, մենդ է։
Բրավո։
Մեկ հատ հետ բանյան արվարտով
Մեկ վարդյան։
Yes,